Welcome to Dear Romance Writer, where three writers who always deliver happily ever afters offer questionable advice for all of your relationship, work, and life problems. I'm Zio Axelrod.
And I'm Roan. Avery is on sabbatical, but we have a truly great show for you today with not one, but two amazing romance authors.
Yay!
Welcome, please say Nisha Sharma and Namrata Patel. Thank you so much for being here, both of you.
Yes, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Oh my gosh, a pleasure. We did an event all together. Some of you may have hung out with us, and it was so fun that we wanted to have you both on the show because, delightful.
Yeah, it was so much fun.
It was great. So why don't we start with Nisha? Will you tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you write?
Sure. So hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me again. I'm really excited to be here. I write young adult and adult contemporary romance. My last young adult book was Radha and Jay's Recipe for Romance, which is about a Bollywood dancer and a classical Indian dancer who have to pair up to achieve their hopes and dreams. And my last adult romance was Dating Dr. Bill, which is the first in the If Shakespeare Was an Auntie trilogy. It's inspired by Taming of the Shrew. And my next book comes out March 1st. It's called The Karma Map, and it is also young adult, but it is a road trip redemption story that takes place through North India.
Wow, that sounds awesome.
Thanks.
Okay, Namrata, what about you? Who are you? Right.
I'm a women's fiction with strong romantic elements, which if we're talking about genre, let's just dive right into that. And my debut, The Candid Life of Meena Dave, came out in June, and my next book is coming out in June of 2023 called Scent of a Garden. I write about women's stories, about identity, belonging, growth, all of the fun stuff.
Awesome. That sounds great. And congratulations on your debut. I didn't realize that was your debut. I keep thinking that you've been around forever because you're so seasoned.
I've been writing forever, but I just got published, and it feels like I've been around forever because I have friends like Nisha that I just wander through life with. So
yeah. Hey, we all want friends like Nisha.
Aww.
Well, listen, we're really excited to have you guys here today, especially because this particular letter, I think, will speak to all of us. Did you get a chance to read through it, Roan? Yeah, it's a doozy.
I like to keep a little mystery for myself so that I can be genuinely shocked and surprised at like how either horrible or wonderful people are. So I just skimmed.
Yeah. This one might strike a nerve. I'm just warning you. And it's from Am I the Asshole? Look, we love to get letters from you guys. We love to hear about your problems. You can write to us. You can fill out our form. It's anonymous on our website. You can slide into our DMs. But, we also like to pull from Am I the Asshole because it's an endless treasure trove of stuff. Yeah. So the headline on this one is, Am I the Asshole for embarrassing, and that's in quotes, in-laws and calling them out? So here we go.
The answer
is no. The answer is no. And I love it because the letter writer is Scottish. So I'm going to try not to slip into a Scottish accent, a really bad Scottish accent while I'm reading this. Okay, so it's a bit of an odd situation, but I do have a more traditional career that pays average. But in 2019, I gave birth to our child. And even though I'm in Scotland and we get 6 months paid maternity leave, money was tight with a newborn baby. So I took on a hobby of writing romance novels online with the aim of just letting off some built up hormones. And then she has in parentheses, tough labor had third-degree tears, so our material relations were on hold for 5 months, end parentheses. With the hope I might make a small amount of extra spending money to buy nice things for the baby and a few treats for us. So that's the setup. 3 years later, and my books made me enough commission to put down a 5% deposit on a house, allowed me to have a great maternity stress-free, with fun experiences for my baby and me, like baby swim classes and baby massage classes, allowed me to book 2 nice holidays, open a small savings account for our child, and still make anywhere between 300 and 1,500 pounds in commission and sales a month. That is some hobby. It's not a millionaire life-changing money, but it has drastically improved our lives with the house, given me amazing bonding experiences with my child, and allows us to have extra fun money every month and to put money aside for our baby's future, and I am so grateful. My mother-in-law is very prudish and found out about the book accidentally by seeing a card that my husband got me to celebrate getting over 1 million readers. Can I just let that lay there for just a second? This woman started writing as a hobby and has 1 million readers 3 years later. Amazing. Anyway, this was displayed in our bedroom. She went to get my child's toy and it was left in my room when she was over for family dinner that night. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. She said she found the card, and while she knows it's not her business, she would be too ashamed to write housewife porn for money. And she hoped I used a pen name so it couldn't be traced back to the family and embarrass them or my child when they are older. My husband and I were a little shocked at her language, but weren't surprised at her snobbiness. And I just laughed at the comment and told her I did use a pen name because I was self-conscious of my work, not because I was ashamed of trying to make a little extra money for my child in a perfectly legal way. At the end of the day, the book paid for food that she's kept and has kept her grandchild full, all the nice toys, a good start in life, roof over her head. And I was very proud of that. And she should think about that before trying to make side comments. The dinner ended quickly. I guess so. And we've moved on since and not mentioned the incident or my book in the past year. However, last week, my mother-in-law commented on my new couch and my husband's new car and asked where we got the money. And when I told her it was from my book commission, she asked me if she could borrow money for a holiday. And I just laughed and told her, hell no. After her previous snobby comment, she should ask her son to borrow some money to put out of his fund money. But she wasn't getting a penny from my book commission that she called me an asshole. Was I out of line? Should I have said yes to keep the peace and been more graceful in my decline? Discuss. My goodness.
God.
Woo. Yeah. Who said no? Who was it that said no right away? Because was it Nisha? Of course it was Nisha, yeah. Wow. Wow.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that is a lot of information to absorb, like
yeah.
a hobby with 1 million readers, making enough to get a new car,
put down on a house.
And then there's like layers of like being shamed for the way you earn money and all of that comes with it. And then
the audacity to ask.
I mean, that is
money.
Can I have money from your mommy porn or whatever housewife porn or whatever she called it? My goodness.
Yeah.
I mean, as someone who like was raised in a relatively conservative / like liberal like household, it's very confusing in South Asian households sometimes. It's like when it comes to your own kids, they're very conservative, but when it comes to society in general, they're all about like liberal views, right? So like growing up, I'm the daughter of I think it's like 13th generation physician. So you know, in my particular family, the idea of like writing romance novels was very like, oh yeah, like that makes sense, but for other people. And so, you know, like, and I think that it took quite a bit of time for my family to see it like as more than a hobby. I don't think it was until like my first book came out that they were actually able to see it. And that's because like, I think we live in this capitalistic world where people associate like value with wealth. And that is something that in the arts, like you cannot see value and wealth as the same thing. So I think like she was 100% correct in telling her like mother-in-law off, like, excuse you, now you see value in the work that I do, like, but you still don't believe in it. You're just looking at the value in terms of like monetary gain. So you know, no, go for it, tell her off, never give her a penny.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that the consistent shaming of any work that has to do with sex or romance is like, it's so clear, it's so egregious, and like I think it's all terrible. Like I was about to make I just think sex work is so stigmatized and people are shamed all the time for making money with their literal own body and resource, like what the fuck. But also I think that there is a way in which that prudishness, that puritanical kind of like everything that even touches sex infects the person who does it with some kind of like something sex
impurity or something.
But like writing romance because people assume that sex is part of romance, which often it is like yeah, I think this is really like about sexism. It's about misogyny. This mother-in-law comes from a different generation and maybe is, you know how so often like the things that we're most jealous of are the things that we judge the most. Like we wish we could do what someone else does, but we don't feel confident enough. So we're like, yeah, they're terrible. You know, we replace jealousy with judgment. And I feel like this mother-in-law from another generation is like both very judgmental and also maybe jealous or envious that this new generation like feels entitled to do what they want and then do what they want with the money it makes them, and that she never did. Like everything about this is clearly such a mother-in-law problem and not a problem with the writing at all. I guess so. My question, I guess, is where is the husband in all of
I was
this?
just thinking that. Yeah,
Because
like
if my mother like shamed my partner for the work that she does, we would have a big problem.
yeah. I mean, she says the dinner ended quickly. We moved on since and not mentioned it, which means that the husband hasn't brought it up either. So maybe he just agrees with her and didn't want to, rock the boat further with his mom. But
Yeah.
the comment that she made in there, something she says, the mother-in-law says she'd be too ashamed to write it, which speaks to your point, Roan, right? Like if I, had the stones, I would have done this myself, but I have, whatever. So yeah, there's definitely envy and jealousy, and I don't even know what else is in there, but it's all on the mom-in-law for sure.
Yeah, and I appreciate you mentioning that generational piece, Roan, because as a Gen Xer, like I see the arc of change so dramatically, right? From when I think about like what was considered illicit bodice ripper covers, which were like more stigmatizing, like they stigmatized the genre, to what was acceptable in society versus like what you hid. And then the rise of like the e-readers and the digital books that allowed people to read things that they enjoyed but did not have to proclaim or be exposed to now, like the turn of, bring back those bodice rippers. They're not illicit. Bring back the I was going to say chestless men, but shirtless men on the covers, and see more and more. So I do think that the generational arc, like the pace of change has been so dramatic. And for a lot of like general readers, not necessarily like genre readers or non-readers, they think about romance in like just a very narrow lens, like either you're writing what this woman refers to as mom porn, or you're writing the 50 Shades of Grey, or like you're well versed in the genre and you see the spectrum of the types of books that are out there that readers gravitate to. So I mean, I am like obviously siding with the writer because duh, but I do think like and not necessarily the tone or the way, like the audacity of asking for money, but I'm also like a Libra and a peacemaker, so I would probably be like maybe just with a hint of pettiness being like, here you go, don't spend it all in one place, and by the way, read a few of my books, they could help you. Instead of like,
oh my gosh, I'm like a Taurus and I would burn that shit down. I know. There's no way. Like I want the heads of my enemies.
This is a complimentary friendship, you guys, because
yeah, Nisha can just like murder all of your enemies.
Yes, and that's what I use her for. I'm like, I'll make nice to your family, you murder my enemies.
It's great. It works out really well. But I mean, I think there's like two parts to this conversation, or multiple parts, because there is like, I feel like the language itself in the letter is very coded, right? So I feel like there's a little bit of shame or embarrassment that the writer herself is experiencing, or themselves, that they're experiencing, because like, oh, it's like a little bit of pocket money and a little bit of savings and just a little bit of whatever, and like a modest
just a
whatever.
few million readers.
And it's like, and like, that's really like, like the only indication of the success that this person has had, right? It's like I purchased a new couch, a new car, and like a card for 1 million readers. Like those are like the few little bits of information that really speak to the success. So I think like internally this person is also wrestling with like some of the like shame that may come with like someone who is now stepping in, like widening their scope and widening their lens of understanding, right? And
Yeah.
so you know, there's definitely that. And I think the other part of it is like and because, and I feel like they're writing the letter because they're like still some of that shame may still exist, and so they're like, maybe this person is right, because internally they're wrestling with it. And I think like the other part of the conversation, and this goes back to like Roan, the conversation about like the way that sex and sex work and anything that touches sex work is perceived, is that, you know, the romance novels, there has been like a strategic campaign by the patriarchy from the dawn of the printing press to make books that feature women, that not just women, but like marginalized identities, that are experiencing joy, and that don't fit into a trauma narrative in a particular way. And that is because if you give marginalized communities an opportunity to think that they have the right to happiness, then they're going to want equality, and the dominant culture or the oppressive culture is not going to have that much power as they used to.
Mhm.
So, you know, like that is also, you know, this conversation, I think, that like is always something that we as writers, as creatives are talking about, because it's like you are feeding directly into the patriarchy by having this narrative that has been fed to us by generations of men who want to make sure that we do not see ourselves in a joy narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, when
Amen.
Nisha drops the patriarchy bomb, we're
Yeah.
about to go there. So
Well, that rolls right into our chat topic, actually, I think.
yeah, but I do think that, you know, and shame is something that's like been more and more in the conversation, particularly around writing in the last couple of months, maybe, in this
Yeah.
idea of like, I see trends around like, of course, you know, you should write what you want, like your readers will find you and all of that, but all of us carry some sort of cultural markers, societal markers, you know, that are like define what we find shameful versus not shameful. And
Mhm.
writers being expected to sort of put their ish into their writing, or like people just assume that because you write mommy porn that's like how you live your life, so that shame is associated with like identity and what people think people will think. Like in this case, the mother-in-law is like what people will think and your name, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
now more and more people are writing under their original name, and like what people will think be damned. But I do find that a lot of those writers are still younger, and they are from a, you know, they're from a generation whose parents are more open and more I don't want to use the word accepting, but have like get taught them that there is no
Mhm.
shame in
Yeah.
sexuality, that
More
there is no
progressive.
shame in enjoying or experiencing joy, you know. But
Mhm.
the patriarchy, the cultural markers still exist, and they're so inherent. And like I see it in myself, whereas like I'm a very private person, my issue isn't around shame, it's just privacy, right? So it's what's the line that I navigate as a writer, because people will this is my debut experience, right? So people are
Yeah.
like, oh, is this your life story? I'm like, clearly you haven't read the book, because A, I'm not a photojournalist. B, like I have nomadic tendencies, but I have a strong support system. I have a great family. I wasn't adopted. None of this is my life story. This is a work of fiction. And that's the reader education part that we haven't really, you know, gone fully in on. I went
Yeah.
on a lot of tangents there.
No, that's great. I mean, I think I totally agree with you, and I think that happens at a much higher proportion if you are a woman writing a female main character, if you're a person of color writing a character of color, if you are someone of a certain, whatever the identity category is, if certain ones of your identity categories match the character, you're always going to get those questions more from readers. And I think that that is also a super interesting, it's interesting to me to notice like which identity categories readers are the most, or editors or whoever, like others than the author, are the most apt to map onto the author. Because I also, especially I having written like many male main characters, there are certain things that nobody ever asks me if they are autobiographical that are autobiographical. And
Right.
there are things that I wrote then when I've written like main characters who are closer to my gender that people are just assume, you know, that these things are true. But I'm like, it seems like if you match your character's race and gender, then like if you have both of those, people are very apt to assume that you're writing your own story. And on the face of it, it's like, they're like, well, what's the problem with that? I'm just asking, you know, but it's like, well, right. But if what you're assuming is that the only way that like certain people can get book contracts, or like the only stories that people are interested in are if they are like not just knowledgeable, but like the authority, it's just proof. It's like social proof
Or
that
bearing your soul on the page, right? In lieu of creativity. Because like the
exactly.
second part of that
Yeah.
question is you're not creative enough to, like, it's a not an explicit thing, but it's an implied thing that you're not creative enough to tell the story unless it's your own, right? I had one of my when I talked about like I've been writing for a long time and I've been on this like trying to get published ride for a long time. And I wrote a book about adult survivors of an elementary school shooting set in Eastern Washington state. And all of my characters were white because that's what I created, right? And I can't tell you, like I had an editor who's like sat in front of me and told me like, oh, what qualifies you to write white characters or write this story? Because all he saw was a brown woman, right? And so it is that like you can't be creative unless you write your own identity.
Yeah.
And at the same time, like we as authors of color, we as authors of different genders and different underrepresented communities want to write creative stories, not just our own over and again, right? So it is that like, I don't know where we started, but that made me think about that. Like, yeah, the identity is so important for readers to say like, I'm going to paint you as this person, right?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I had a professor who actually said to me, and I had, you know, we had to like pitch the story we were going to work on for the semester. And my story was like this like supernatural featuring a, you know, queer white man. And, you know, I pitched a story and the students were like, oh, man, sounds really cool. You know, and the professor said like, well, anyone who reads it is just going to assume that your character is a Black female. And I was like, what about the character that I just described to you screams Black? She's like, well, you know, as the author, they're just going to assume that the character is you. And I was like, so it was such a, and like everyone, it got really quiet in the room and everyone kind of looked at each other like, what is she talking about? And then, yeah, we all dropped the class. But that was, but that's a thing. Like they look at you and go, okay, you know, I've had editors say like, I want the struggle, the story of the struggle. I want to hear your voice. I'm like, that's not, but yeah. So yeah, I hear what you're saying, Nam. It's frustrating
It is
that,
frustrating.
you know, I mean, we talk about who should write what story and who has the right to tell a story. And there are stories that should be told by the people who live those experiences. But, you know, I write lots of characters who are not me, you know, in race or gender or anything else. And that should be part of our, you know, our toolbox as an author.
And that's the equity versus equality, right? Like it's okay that some stories can't be written by cis het white men, like,
yeah,
and that's okay. Like that they get to write everything, right? So for me, equity means like I have stories that are like very much things that I want people, members of my community or shared identity, to want to write. And then I still want the freedom, because I've lived in a white dominant patriarchal society, that I feel like I have enough knowledge to be like, yes, I went to school. Yes,
I
I'm
mean,
affected by school shootings.
That's the funny thing about that comment about like you not what qualifies you to write white characters is like
White
all of
supremacy.
media, all of pop
Well,
culture, my
I think
entire
that's
life.
like what people don't realize, like that we as marginalized communities have always had to default to the lifestyle and the existence of the dominant cishet white culture. So we are intimately familiar with the cishet white culture, yet the cishet white culture, or like white men, have not
It's
had
not
to
reciprocal.
do the same. They've never
Yeah.
had to do like they've
Yeah.
never had to like figure out like how to buy like specific ingredients at grocery stores that are 40 minutes away just to like eat this one thing like that you need for like a specific religious event. Like that is
Right,
not a
right.
thing, you know?
Some of them
And
are still challenged by buying tampons. Like,
yeah, I mean, like they've got they establish like barriers for themselves. I mean, that's to be honest, that's probably what happens there. But like I will say that, you know, I know we're like super far from the actual letter, but you know, one of the things that really like um I struggle with when it comes to like people understanding like me writing myself in like my perceived identity, like, or let me back up. What I struggle with the most is when like people not only like read my books and then assume I'm writing like my existence and my exact experience into a story. Like it bothers me when they then critique it as something that is not an authentic narrative, because they feel like that narrative does not meet the stereotypes that they have internalized and they think is like the truth about who I am. And like I feel like that goes across the board for romance and for romance writers, where like people will get upset if in real life they know you and they're like, I don't know how you're writing this, like this is not who you are, like, or this is not real, like this is, you are not a real writer, like because of, you know, one way or another they can't understand what's on the page and what you are two separate entities,
Yeah.
and both of
Yeah.
them have truth.
and
So
like the layer beyond that is our identities have been co-opted by society, right? So even people who are Desi or Gujarati will say, but this isn't representative of what Indian culture or Desi culture is supposed to be, or like Islamic
right.
culture, like Muslims don't drink or, you know, smoke or things like that. Like it is even our own people, I don't know what the word is, but even people who grew up here and that are younger have reference points that have been created by society to say this is what Bollywood is, this is what Indian food is, this is what, you know, and then when you have it in a book that's different from what society says it is, it's like, no, we don't eat like sambar for breakfast. Well, yeah, parts of India do, right? You know, and maybe your family grew up in that, or maybe you didn't. So it's sometimes feels like rock hard place situation, because you're just like, I just want to write my stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that is why, like that and a million other reasons is why whenever we call for more diversity in romance, every time there's pushback in ways that you know, I mean, I would say I don't expect, but of course I do at this point, just but it does seem like a thing that like especially white people don't understand, is like they believe that there has to be equality, meaning if one person can write outside of their experience, that means everyone should be able to write outside of their experience. And it's like so clearly more complicated. Every element of identity is complicated, and if you make an intersectional identity, then it's just like multiplicatively more complex and more individual. And so we need more stories of all kinds by all people, so that there are like as many shades of every identity and every intersection of that identity as there are people who have lived that or who know someone who have lived that. And it's like, it's so simple. White people, we don't know how to write characters of color because we live in a white supremacy. People of color know how to write white people because they also live in a white supremacy. Like, it's so simple. It's so simple. And, you know, it's just, yeah. Yeah.
And they get to have that spectrum, like Joyce Carol Oates and Laurie Montero. There's like huge daylight between the two, right? But at the same time, like, nobody's going to be like, oh, it's because you're white or because you're a woman or because you're a certain age. Like, it's just, they get to just do their things, you know, and not a fan of one of them, but you can decide which one.
Yeah, and it's so clear when you look at like what white people don't get challenged on. So like, I just wrote an entire series of books set in a made up small town in Wyoming. I have been in Wyoming for 5 days total in my life on one trip, like 6 years ago or 4 years ago, or I don't know, pandemic time. And I have stated a million times in interviews and like panels and stuff that I made it up from scratch because I wanted there to be a queer small town and I thought Wyoming was pretty. Like, literally, that is why I said it there. And never one time has someone said to me, like, I don't think you really understand what it's like to be a white person in Wyoming. And your books clearly show, you know, no, I've gotten, oh, that's so cool. I love that you just made up a whole town where we can all be gay in peace. And I was like, right. Now think about like what the response is that you phrase differently when it's not a white person writing like another like micro white identity. And it's just so obvious. Like, I never received this pushback. And so yeah. Well, I'm really eager to segue into our chat topic because I feel like all of the themes that we're talking about here are gonna come to bear. So the chat is actually prompted by some of the edits that this letter writer made to her post, made to the Am I the Asshole post. So I'm going to read these updates and then we can continue because I think we're in the right vein.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So edit number 1, this is from the original letter writer. I really appreciate all the messages asking to read my book, but I am not going to share the name because those books are, okay, don't laugh, werewolf and mafia romance books. And then she has the like crying, laughing emojis. I know, but I did market research and there is a massive market for sci-fi fantasy romance novels. So I wrote that genre to try to make a little extra money for our child. And I ended up making £9,000 in the first year from them. And I continued to make about £300 to £1,000 every month. Commission is royalties in UK speaking, every month now from them. So yes, it's embarrassing a little. Parenthetical, no judgment on people who love them. Everyone has a kink and you do your thing. It's just embarrassing for me to write them. And parentheses. But hey, those books bought me a house, got me noticed by Amazon, and I now write Scottish historical romances under a different pen name. And I love my side hustle. I'm making enough to keep a roof over my child's head and food in her stomach, as well as a good quality of life. So the embarrassment is worth it. Edit number 2. A few people have messaged to ask the same question. The books my mother-in-law know about are the genre sci-fi fantasy romance and are published on a website called Dream. The most popular has made £200,000 in revenue, but with my contract, I only get 9%. So over the last 3 years, I made about £18,000 from the most popular in ebook sales and about £11,000 on the other. I now write different, more mature historical romances and make more doing that than I do in my normal job. So I've recently gone part-time in my normal job. Okay, so those are the edits. Just good job to her for finding success and earning money, although that royalty split, like, I think you—
What the hell?
That was awful. What was that?
I like
the language she herself uses in terms of normal, embarrassed.
She's like, embarrassed and
she's got some
wink,
work
wink.
to do.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I'm sure it carries over in the writing sometimes, right? Like, I don't know. I don't know what that formula is.
It's like, girl, fix your face. Stop it.
Yeah. So
and she's writing more mature books now, whatever that means. Like,
Scottish historical.
Scottish historical is the most mature of all genres. Okay, so those are the edits. So I want to ask
Garwood would like a word.
Yeah, seriously. Well, so I want to ask you all, because, you know, this is all about like, I think Nisha, you were saying that she clearly also has some internalized embarrassment and shame. So yeah, clearly she has kind of proven you right. So she clearly feels the need to like explain away this choice, even in making a distinction between two different like subgenres within romance, which is interesting because I think that, and that's a whole conversation that we can either have now or another time, is like the stratification of like the most I'm making huge air quotes for those listening, the most like shameful or embarrassing subgenres of romance to write, and the most like legitimate whatever romance is the way to write. So okay, so here is our question, right? But this comes up so often in romance, like readers and authors try to either downplay the romance or like describe as upmarket what they're either reading or writing. And I think this is super interesting also because Nam, we have you who you are writing something that like publishing considers more quote unquote upmarket, right? Or like less embarrassing. Obviously we don't believe any of these words, but so like, have you ever wrestled with either reading or writing romance, other genre fiction, other like genre fiction that's maligned, you know? How did you come to terms with it, either as a reader or a writer? And like, what do we actually think is behind the disdain that people have for romance, other genres as well, but like romance specifically, and then like those other subgenres within romance that carry somehow more shame?
Nisha, you want to go first? Because I think you're going to bring the fire and then I'm going to bring the hose.
Bring the fire.
Bring the fire and bring the hose.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I definitely think this goes back to the conversation of like patriarchy developing a narrative to frame the conversation around books that are about like that center a marginalized voice that is experiencing joy. So it's like we are directly feeding into that narrative that is built for us in order to like stop people from believing that this joy has value. And that's not true. It's 100% not true. And I think within romance itself, the stratification between like the upmarket or the like more mature, whatever she used as a qualifier, books and the sci-fi romance is that it kind of stems from like the ivory tower thinking in academia, where there are certain areas of study that have more value and certain areas of study that do not. I don't know who the hell, like, I feel like he needs to get kicked in the head because it has to be a he who like developed this belief system that like genre fiction or books that have like a very specific like target readership are easier, or they are like less they have like less worth, or they teach readers like lessons that are of less value. And like that is obviously not true. I mean, that's something that we as like writers all understand very well. It's not true. It's hard as hell to get two people to build chemistry throughout a book and then keep them apart for the entire length of the book until there's a moment where you know you can bring them together, and only an external factor can keep them apart until you are ready to solve that external factor. Like that shit is not easy.
No.
and like I think that the like this language that the writer is using, first I have to say, like, I've been, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's stubbornness. Maybe it's like the fact that like, despite the fact that my family has like very interesting thoughts about writing, like I've never shied away from telling people that I was a romance writer. I like went to law school. I worked in corporate contracts. I like retired from my corporate career at the peak of my career as a chief diversity officer. And like every time I spoke to C-suite executives in global tech companies that were partner companies, I would also always say that I write romance because I feel so strongly in the importance of like making this something that is normalized. And I don't think, you know, like, and I think that me hiding it is not going to do my genre and my work any, you know, any service. But, you know, I think that like coming from like also Europe, where there is like more deeply rooted problematic like patriarchal belief systems, like I can see that, you know, why like being Scottish is like an important like piece of information in this as well. Because like if this person was from New York, I'd be like, what is happening?
Right,
I would
right.
be very
That's a
confused.
good point.
But I feel like her society is also shaping, like with constant pressure from all sides, her belief systems. And not to excuse her and not to, you know, like be like, okay, this is okay. But, you know, I'm not surprised by it. So I will say that.
That's a good point.
So my background is in marketing and identity work. So I've done graduate degrees in both those things. And a lot of this is marketing, right? So it is not necessarily actual markers of quality, but it is what is designated as a count. So, you know, the National Book Awards was just released a couple of weeks ago or yesterday. What is time? And you know, you have the Nobel Prize and you have the Booker Prize and you have all of these. And again, these are for-profit institutions that are set up as standard bearers, right? And they dictate what that is. Now, publishing has always been like rooted in that institutionalism, right? And it is within their, it was to their benefit to have these markers of quality or markers of like, you know, award winners or whatever that means. What happened with the democratization for indie is like, there wasn't a market for that. It was people, it was a small business model. It was certain people read certain books because they were told they were good, right? It's how our English lit classes were in high school, like, but they didn't understand the market. Romance writers at that time were like staying in their bubble. They knew they were making money. They knew people were buying their books. We all, like, I had the subscription box to the Harlequin Presents, right? Like, but they didn't need to make a big noise about it. It was just quietly making money in the corner. And then when the money started clashing, when indie started making money, and even, you know, this woman understands the economics of like writing,
Market research.
for her
Market
an ability to get some status or cachet. And I think like the intersection of those two are getting more and more blurred because of like people like Nisha who are like, I'm not going to stay quiet in my quiet corner. I'm going to tell you what I like. And I'm, you know, my dad is read her book and I'm like, no, Dad, like there's rimming in there. Like, stop. That's just because he's my dad and I don't want him to know certain things. I'm a product of like 2 cells splitting and
Immaculate conception.
Yes, thank you. I think like that more and more people that are blurring the economics is going to force the hand of like the institutionalists because they're making less and less money on status books, right? And they knew that this romance was funding the elitism, but now romance is like, we want recognition along with the profitability. And if we can't get that, we're just going to go indie and still make the dollars, right? Because the readers are there and that's the market there. So in a long way to get there, like the genre thing is going to continue to blur, in my opinion. And you know, the reason I say strong romantic elements versus romance is because what Nisha said, it is hard to have the reader know the ending and you deliver a book where they forget they know the ending, right? So I think like the question around like quality and those or status, or they're gonna like fall out. And I think a lot of indie writers are also seeing that readers are now able to tell whether a book's been edited or the first draft is put up just for commercial, right? And so more and more people are gonna like lean towards like, I'm gonna work on my craft and I'm gonna make my own money and I'm gonna take out the middleman at times, right? So long answer, but that's what I think it is. I think genre is just gonna slowly blur.
I find it interesting that these these ideas about romance and like the malignment of romance. Because I was on my way to Louisville for an event last month, and this woman sat down next to me. She must have been in her late 60s, early 70s, and she had a book in her hand. And of course, you know me, I'm like, oh, what are you reading? And she was reading some thriller or something. And I was like, oh, cool. And then, you know, where are you going? And I had like my banner with me and all kinds of accoutrements. She's like, what's all this? And I was like, I'm going to a book event. She's like, oh, are you a reader or a writer? And I said, both, but I'm going there, you know, as an author. What do you write? I said, I write romance. And she said, oh, yes, I suppose there are a lot of people who read those books. And I was like, yeah. And I'm looking at
Rude.
the thriller in her hand, and I'm wondering what is the difference between, like, no one ever goes to John Grisham and goes, you know, you write these books, we all know what's going to happen at the end. They're going to catch the guy, or they're going to solve the crime, or whatever it is. And no one ever says to them, like, oh, you should write a real book. No one ever says to Stephen
He
King, you
takes
should
it in.
write a real book. You know what I mean? But
But
you
they're
get the,
men.
because they're
But they're
men,
men.
but you get that. But even with the genre, like, you know, no one does it with mystery or thriller, but they do it with romance. Like, it's
Yeah.
formulaic, it's predictable, it's this, it's that. Well, like, you know, if you pick up a mystery and you don't know who did it by the end, is that a good mystery? You know,
No.
it's just doesn't make any sense to me why. But then you think about it, and it's, you know, predominantly written by and for women, and
Yeah.
that's when you get to that point right there, you can't really see past anything else. So
And we as women are our own worst judges, right? Because we lived in that shame for a while around romance and did not come out and say, like, I read romance or I write romance. Like, we were complicit in
yeah, oh, absolutely.
the making of what the romance category is perceived as. And we continue to be, because, you know, even with like women's fiction, my goodness, there's romance in
That's
every
such a
story. Like, there's
strange
romance in tragedy, there's romance in, like, you know, maybe not Room, which was, that book was too dark, but like, there's a lot of romance out there, and people just say, if it's solely this, then I'm going to devalue it, which is because
yeah.
then I can sound identity. I can sound like I read Booker Prize winning books, and
Yeah.
they haven't. You know?
Yeah,
So
you know,
it's tough. Yeah.
it's so interesting too, because what I'm thinking of listening to all of you talking about this, because so I used to be in academia, and I mean, I was in English. I got my PhD in English, like that's what I studied. And it's funny because the stuff that I studied in academia was sort of marginalized within academia. But then when I left academia and started writing, I was like, oh no, this is like even more marginalized because it's not even within academia. But what it's making me think of is that we seem to have this like idea that literature is a subject, like a subject in school, a subject of academic study, and the pleasure that people get from it is incidental to the self-betterment of like reading the greats. You know, this is like
Yeah.
where canonicity comes from, which is obviously like totally fucked and a whole other conversation. But basically, like the canon of literature, we all know now, was created by white men. Like we have passed it on and passed it on and passed it on to the point where it has set the standard, right? It has become the standard. And everything else is seen as sort of like a copy of a copy of a copy. Like the farther a book gets away from like the canon of the literary greats, the less value it has. It's like value is leached out of it. Like each step farther you go away from like this platonic ideal of a novel, which is like Dickens or something. I don't know. And so I do think it's really interesting to imagine like the reason behind genre. I mean, we all know lots and lots of reasons why like all genre fiction is maligned in some ways, but like it seems to boil down to, if you like it, it's not good, which I think is like such a strong basis of the patriarchy. And I think what we were talking about before, you know, when you were talking, Nisha, about like stories about joy versus stories about tragedy, is like denying women, people of color, queer people, like denying everything except the patriarchy, any enjoyment, is like, to me, what is behind all of the value fall off for different books. And I think that romance is intrinsically feminist? No, I think that there's lots of proof. Like there are too many books that are anti-feminist for me to ever believe that. But I do think that like choosing to read for joy is inherently like a rebellious revolutionary act for all the reasons we've discussed. And I just think it's a good indicator, like if the thing that you like is despised by the powers that be, you're probably on the right track.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Again, this just, I mean,
Your
just
book has been banned. You're probably
yeah, like if a book has been banned, if someone would make fun of you for reading it on the subway, if someone, when you said that you were really enjoying it, would like feel the need to shame you for your enjoyment, then like reading or writing those kind of books, you're probably on the right side of the fight, you know, at least in terms of trying to clutch back this category. And I also think like just at base, privileging written knowledge over any other type, like that is the basis of white supremacy and the patriarchy, right? So like if you can say we get to be making knowledge, we get to be like distributing our stories in words that are part of our language, our community, our ethnicity, like whatever these things are, our region, like that is a direct challenge to the idea that the only appropriate and official mode of knowledge production and germination is like a professionally written, professionally published book that has been edited by, you know, all these people. So I do think that like indies are frightening to people, not just because of the monetary power of them, but also because they managed to skirt the official gatekeepers.
Yeah, it's also about, you know, the stories that have value, the stories that, you know, like I was talking a couple of years ago at a keynote about the collective narrative is missing like 97% of the voices that should be heard, because we've only heard this 3% for the last 400 years or whatever. And now these other voices are finding a way to get their stories out there, and it's a challenge. Because if you have a chance to listen to read another adaptation of a classic, you know, for the 12th or 15th time, rather than a brand new story, a brand new piece of folk art, you know, that's being translated for the first time in modern language or whatever, then which one are you going to choose? And so it's like, you know, yeah.
And we've conditioned reading from the beginning, right? Because parents are taught to read to their kids for development and learning, not for joy, or for like language development and not for interest. So that gets carried over in school. And so reading becomes homework, reading becomes chore. Like I read Judy Blume and Ramona Quimby in the school library. But if you asked me to read a book, to write an essay, like that wasn't happening, because I am a writer now, but I hated writing. Like I hated writing essays and composition. And so it does like then develop what your sense of like what good is. Yeah. And if I can learn something, it is good. But if I just lean in and read, you know, Dating Dr. Dill for the 4th time, I'm not learning anything. I mean, I learned a lot in that book, but you know, but it is this like idea of how we get judged. And so then it becomes part of like, I can't say that I read mom porn because people are going to judge me. I'm going to say I'm reading like, you know, Station 11 or whatever it is that's like on the bestseller list. And I'm putting bestseller in quotes now. Yeah. So yeah. But it is that whole idea, and more, and I think it's really thanks to indie that people have a voice to say, no, I like this and I'm okay liking it, you know, and you can just like fuck off if you don't like that I like it. So
yeah, I mean, the dollar talks, right? Money talks. And so now you have publishers publishing monster porn or whatever you want to call it, monster romance, you know, because like 5 years ago they would have been like, oh, we don't know that exists, we don't want to see it, we don't want to hear it. And now they're like, yeah, let's give it a fabulous cover and get it out there, because they know it's going to sell.
Oh yeah, I mean, like there are like indie authors who are now making 7 figures, reissuing their books with trad publishers.
Yep.
You know, like that have books that have been out since like 2012. And like I think part of this conversation that I just want to like caveat it for everyone who's listening, is that like like, just because it makes money doesn't mean it doesn't have value. Just because it's about like a genre book doesn't mean you can't learn anything. And just because it's like in like a book by a traditional publisher, like in considered literary fiction, does not mean it has merit. You know, like they're like, everything is all gray when it comes to publishing. And I think that's the lesson romance writers, and I think like romance authors, and I think even to some extent like romance readers who have been in the industry for a long time, would like the general public to understand. Like, you know, romance is not a like little category to fit in a box that is based on the stereotypes that are established by like a dominant group. Like romance, it has so many different like facets to it, and you know, it could be really amazing and special and spectacular. Like no one is going to tell me that a Kennedy Ryan book is like can't teach you something and doesn't have literary merit.
Seriously.
Like Kennedy Ryan will blow the top off your head, and you know, she writes indie romance. So, you know, like I'd like someone to argue with me about that.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to argue with you. I think like, yes, thank you for caveating that. What I meant is like, there's also value in that comfort read. There's also value in knowing that I'm not going to be traumatized at the end, or knowing that like when I open up a specific author's book, I know what I'm going to get, and I need that in my life, right? So it's that dual benefit of like, what I take away is very, very subjective, and why I go into a book is very, very subjective. So that's why awards don't, I mean, you know, I'm not going to turn down the money if someone wants to give me a prize, but it does come down to money, because I don't write indie. So you don't make indie level money in trad, is what I've learned, thanks to knowing people like Nisha.
I mean, I don't even know. I'm like, we're talking rumors here because I'm not indie yet, but like, you know, at this point, you know, indie is like, I think like beyond money, what indie is really fascinating to me is like you can explore things that are beyond the scope of what trad can do for you.
Yep.
And so like if I want to write something that is a blend of 3 genres, I know that I'm going to find readers who are interested in a blend of 3 genres.
Yeah.
And that's what goes back to what Roan, you said about gatekeeping. Like editors have preconceived biases around what is, you know, what is a story. Like for years I would get passes on my books because my heroine was too passive. And, you know, and then I read up like Eastern storytelling is very different. Eastern storytelling is heroes and heroines are passive and action is done to them. Western stories are heroes and heroines have agency. I write in Western culture. I'm published in America, so therefore I need to fit into that narrative. But I couldn't like understand what it was about the bias of like your heroines are too passive, because I'm like, but so much is happening here, right? And like, oh yeah, but it's happening to her. I'm like, because life happens to you. and that's like growing up as a woman of color, like my experiences are life happens to me. And it hasn't been until recently where I'm like, wait, I have agency, I have power, I have privilege, I have authority. Like those things for some of us are learned later in life, right? So your writing informs that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, this has been amazing.
I know. I'm like, I want to keep talking to you all forever.
I know, right? We went deep. No, this has been great. And I think, I mean, I really hope that the letter writer finds her own agency. I mean, it seems like she, you know, she took that one moment to say no to someone who's been bullying her over her career choice. I think that she needs to do some soul searching though, and like realize that she's done an amazing thing. She's done something that so many other authors, they wish they could be in her position, and she's sort of dismissing it as a fluke or a hobby or whatever. Yeah.
Fun money, like
fun money.
Fun money for a lot of
buying
people.
a car is not fun money.
No. Putting down a deposit on a house is not fun. Well, and I think this is just the second generation or the millionth generation of misogyny, right? Is because this woman who has had this great success has decided that because it's in a like shamed category, then everything about it carries shame, including the money itself and including her readers who, like, I think that there are few things that I find more distasteful than someone who has made a career on the enthusiasm of other people shitting down their throats.
Yeah.
And it's disgusting. And I think it is so fucking entitled. And so, like, if you are ashamed of what you write, like, that's your problem. You don't need to paint everyone who enjoys and gives money to enjoy your work with the brush of your shame. Like, go to therapy and get over your shit. Don't put it on other people.
Yeah.
What Roan said.
One thing, like, the foundation of being a good writer is respect your reader, right? Like, just respect your reader and write from that place. And
I'm really curious who this woman is, honestly. I just want, like, let's dream.
The way that I am looking up after we were done, the way I'm looking up werewolf sci-fi romance.
I bet
there's one person on this call who will find that answer, and that is not me.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm curious, like, I would love to check back in once I always feel like I get off one of these episodes and then 2 hours later, I'm like, oh, I realized what I actually wanted to say. But I'm really curious what, like, okay, if we were hanging out in person right now, we could do this on like a whiteboard or a piece of large paper. If you were to take the subgenres of romance, of which there are so many, lots of them overlap, etc., and were to, like, write them out, could we rank, like, do you think we could rank which subgenres, I'm talking about perception wise, right, are, like, perceived, like, what's the order of shame that people perceive around either writing or reading them? And then could we, after ranking them, could we actually see, like, what are the things? Is it about sex? Is it about kink? Is it about race? Is it about gender? Is it about penetration? Like, what is it? And I bet we could map on, like, which are the gross cultural shames and where they map exactly to make that. And now I kind of
100%.
I
That'd
really
be an interesting, like, really elaborate poll to put together.
Next time we're doing an event in Peddlers Village together, let's, like, take a couple hours beforehand. Like, we'll convene. I'll bring a whiteboard.
Sounds amazing. I mean, you had me at whiteboard really for because I'm just really curious, and I think it's something that, like, we talk about a lot kind of in general conversation, but I would be super curious to see, like, how nitty gritty we could get with, like, figuring out why X, Y, or Z has, like, slightly more cachet than 1, 2, 3.
And if we break it down by, I'm complicating the process as a marketer. If we break it down by, like, age of the demographic of the reader, age and identity, that would be really interesting, because that's when you're really going to be able to tell, like, how long is this trend going to last, or how, like, is it going to have a long lifetime, right? Like, so I want to do this.
Okay, let's do it.
The next
I know, right?
I know, we need to just make a date to do this later.
I'm so game.
Well, listeners, and if any of our listeners out there have any thoughts on this, because we know we have listeners who read everything under the sun, we're really curious to find out what your, I hate the term guilty pleasure, but you know that you have that one genre that you feel kind of a little weird or a little, guilty reading. So I want to know what that is. Tell me your deep, dark secrets, please.
Yes.
My guilty pleasure is anything written by a man.
How do you bear the guilt? It must weigh so heavy.
Your guys are gonna get hate mail now. Like, oh, can you please stop bringing cis-het white male haters on your podcast?
Nisha, just say not all men.
Listen, I'm sorry, you get to be the only unmarked category, so I'm gonna mark my territory on you. And you're in. JK, no urine here. I've interrupted our lovely conclusion that you were doing.
Oh, no, it's fine. It's all good. Nisha, please tell everyone where they can find you and what project you're working on, or what you want them to read. Read everything. Read everything by her.
Absolutely. So my last book that came out is Dating Dr. Dill. It's on shelves at, like, your local indie bookstores. So if you're interested in a rom-com inspired by Shakespeare, that is the book to go to. My next book that comes out is called The Karma Map. I had previously mentioned. It comes out March 1st. It will be in Kindle Unlimited for the first month. So if you are interested, definitely check it out. The Karma Map, again, is a mean girl redemption story, road trip romance through North India. And then the one book that's coming out in between that I think I'm going to make it. It's my first indie.
Ooh.
It's a short novella. It's a holiday romance. It's a queer romance, and it takes place in the Singh family trilogy world. It's called Singh Family Christmas. So,
oh, cool.
That is going to
Can't wait for
be
that.
out December 4th. Thank you very much.
Love
Oh,
a
yay.
holiday.
Yeah. Where can they find you on social media? So Nisha is like a TikTok queen, so you guys have to follow her on TikTok. But where can they find you?
I'm like a chaos monkey on TikTok. I can be found on TikTok, Instagram, and on Twitter at Nisha Writes, WRITES. And I recently started using all of my camera equipment that I collect in my house that collects dust. And I started blogging. So you can find me on YouTube at Nisha Writes Online. So.
Oh, cool.
I'm going to check that out. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Thanks. It's very new, but I'm very excited.
Cool.
You're going from most productive to least productive in me. You can find me. My debut is The Candid Life of Mina Dave. You can find it where books are sold. And my second book, Scent of a Garden, is coming out in June. It's available for pre-order. My website is nampatel.com. Again, not Nisha Sharma, but like my Instagram is Namrata Patel author. And my Twitter is at Patel. And I only go on TikTok. I don't do TikTok. So
Gotcha. It's okay. It's all right.
I like animal TikTok, like dogs, horses, that whatever that emu was for a while.
Fun. Well, thank you both for being here. We really enjoyed having you guys here today. It's been amazing. And make sure you guys go and follow them both and buy all their books and read other things and pre-order all the things, because they are both amazing, incredible authors, and you really don't want to miss their voices. And as for us, Roan and I will be back again next week with another episode. Avery will not be with us for a bit. She's on sabbatical, but she's always here in mom spirit. Remember, we want to hear from you. Send your questions to advice@dearromancewriter.com or DM us on our socials at Dear Romance Writer on Twitter, on Instagram, or either Roan and I. We're happy to take a DM from you guys. We want to hear all your deep, dark, dirty secrets, or your neighbors. We can't wait to offer you more questionable advice from us happily ever after enthusiasts. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye, all.
Thank you so much for subscribing to Dear Romance Writer. Remember to keep sending in those letters at dearromancewriter.com. We can't wait to tell you what to do. Dear Romance Writer is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you'll love, frolic.media/podcasts.